So what I'm going to talk about is a bit the combination of two papers. I've been working with different co-authors. One is on an informational experiment that we carried out in Italy and Spain. So I thought it was particularly appropriate given that this conference is at the Bank of Spain. And then another paper in which we have been exploiting this very tough reform, I think to a large extent unprecedented by magnitude, that took place in Italy in 2011. It is called in Italy the Fornero reform, from the name of the labor minister at that time, but it was a very, very tough one, and involving for some people the postponement of retirement age for up to 6 years. Just a few words of introduction, although those who spoke before me have been talking a lot about these things. We know that longevity and reduced fertility rates in most advanced economies have clearly induced an unprecedented increase in countries' dependency ratios. And clearly this is a major challenge, especially for those countries that rely for the most on pay-as-you-go pension systems. These systems clearly are sustainable insofar as the size of the retired population is not too large compared to the working age populations. It is true that there has been a change in the policy stance towards public retirement, in that from a trend that has gone on for several decades, in which we were allowing for earlier and earlier retirements, just while we were getting with medical progress to increase longevity. Since basically the turn of the century, countries have started tightening up the retirement age and increasing the retirement age, as I will document very, very shortly. But there is another threat. So maybe you may also have a pension system, like, for instance, NDC system that have automatic adjustment to longevity. But there is a threat that these clearly systems to a large extent cannot cope with, and this is related to the decline in fertility. So having smaller and smaller cohorts of people entering the labor market every year. So these are just some data from OECD statistics. The dependency ratio is estimated to double over the next 30 years, from 30 to 60%. And the case of Italy and Spain is, so it's not by chance that it chose these two countries also to carry out our experiment. According to some demographic projections, in Italy we are bound to have within just 25 years a condition where we have one pensioner per worker. So clearly a major problem for the work of a pay-as-you-go system. But Spain is not that far from the Italian case. And this trend is particularly strong, especially in those countries that rely predominantly on pay-as-you-go pension system, which is basically 24 out of 38 OECD countries. This is what I was telling you before. So the policy stance has changed towards public retirement schemes. So until the year 2000, the effective age of retirement was declining almost everywhere. But since then, governments with hard, difficult choices have been increasing the retirement age, although the pace of the change is not as fast as one could have expected given the demographic developments. Now, under these conditions, where there is an increasing retirement age, but there is a very strong also decline in fertility, immigration can be an important channel to, at least in the short run, increase the sustainability of a pension system by allowing for larger cohorts to enter the labor market every year. It is true that migrants sooner or later will also become pension beneficiaries, but clearly in the short run there is a positive effect. And plus, as I will argue, there is also often in many countries receiving migrants a form of social, I would call it social free riding, whereby migrants pay into the systems but do not acquire the seniority to be able then to draw pension, or sometimes they just leave a country without benefiting from the pension. So there is a free riding on this contribution. Migrants are younger than natives. This is a theoretical but also an empirical fact. And also there is the fact that at least the first generation of migrants has higher fertility rate than natives. So the contribution of migrants to addressing this fertility crisis is rather important. And also they have a higher labor force participation than the natives. They are also extremely mobile and more able to react also to employment opportunities when they are located in a different part of the countries, in countries with large imbalances, regional imbalances like Italy or Spain. The role of migrants in filling vacancies is indeed particularly important. So these are just some calculations that were done about the net fiscal position of the migrants in several countries. The net social security, focusing simply on social security contribution, amounted to about 7 billion euros in Italy in 2017. And there are projections that if we were to stop completely migration, as some scenarios expect, I'm talking here about clearly legal migration, so people paying in contribution. And, for several years, Italy had a policy towards migration that was reducing very much legal flows. So there were only about 10,000 people allowed to enter legally the labor market every year, so it's not very far away from a scenario of zero immigration. Then migrants were coming in an event, but clearly entered only the underground economy and not being able to pay social security contribution. So this type of projection and simulations are quite revealing. So that would have been a loss of about 40 billion euros by the year 2000. In Spain also, the government has recognized that the pension system will not be sustainable without the contribution of workers, and I refer in particular to this talk in which there was this reference to the fact that Spain needs at least 270,000 migrants to save the pension system. However, the opposition to migrants is very strong, and it is actually growing in different countries. This is at least what we can get not only from this electoral success of anti-immigrant parties, but also from social surveys. This is what the European Social Survey is telling us. This is a survey that has been carried out for several years and has been covering pretty well migration issues. So the share of those positively answering to the question about what do you think immigrants are, those in favor of migration declined from 22% to 10%, and those instead that were having very negative position about migration also almost doubled over time. What are the possible motivations behind this strong opposition against migration? Clearly, there can be political reasons, political views, ideology, and views a priori about migrants. There can be a low trust towards the government. There can also be a misperception of the benefit and cost of migration, in particular vis-à-vis the net fiscal position, because surveys do suggest that public opinion is not so much worried about the labor market impact of migration. It's very much instead concerned about the fiscal impact of migration. There is also possibly some zero-sum thinking, but as I said, labor market are not so much a consideration. So the idea that migrants could steal jobs to native doesn't seem to be very much in the mind of people, and also, as I will document, is not so much also in the data. This is simply a cross-section of countries, and I'm plotting on the vertical axis employment rates of native-born, and on the horizontal axis employment rate of foreign-born. I could do the same with unemployment rates, and the picture is always the same. There is a strong positive correlation. So countries with high employment among natives are countries with high employment also among migrants. And vice versa. So it doesn't seem to be clearly, but also in the long run, one may be concerned about the short-run impact of migration, having labor supply shocks that may displace native workers. There, I think the other paper I've been working on is quite revealing. So we have been using the experiment of the 2011 pension reform that was completely unexpected. It occurred overnight during the Eurozone debt crisis. Was really a dramatic condition for the country. We have been looking at the degree of substitution of workers over different age groups by using the fact that there were these workers were de facto locked in firms as a result of this reform. In Italy, we have very strict employment protection legislation, so employers could not lay off workers with such a long seniority after the increase in their retirement age. Also, wage adjustment in Italy is very much limited by the fact that we have a centralized bargaining system. So clearly we look at quantity adjustment and look at whether the fact that employers were forced to to retain workers at that age for a much longer time did affect the demand for middle-aged and young workers. And what we found is that actually there was a strong complementarity between young and older workers, and some substitution between older and middle-aged, but not as much as one could have thought, even in the very short run. So clearly also in the short run there can be a complementarity. So having more young people like migrants coming in the labor market is certainly not detrimental to the labor market of the older workers. So let us go back to this perceived hostility vis-à-vis the migrants, and this is what we have been trying to understand and to investigate, and in particular ways to correct for the widespread misperception of the role of the migrants and the role of the migrants into the work of the pension systems. So we have been carrying out an information experiment in which we improve the knowledge of the interviewees about the work of the pension system and the demographic developments, and see how that did affect their views about the role of migration. The type of information that we have been provided is of two types. The first type is something related to the functioning of the pension system, so explaining what a pay-as-you-go system is, and we know that on that there is clearly a lack of awareness. Many people think that the pension system, the pay-as-you-go pension system, works very much as a bank account. And also there is not much information about the demographic trends. Surprisingly enough, demographic decline and all of these issues have not been at the center of the political and the public debate for a long time, in spite of the fact that the data are quite striking in this respect. So we carry out this experiment in 2021, And in this survey, we provided this, there was a treatment group in which we provided to respondents to a random sample, a video providing information about the pension systems and the demographic trends. And the important thing is that we never mentioned migration in this information experiment. So we were just providing information about the work of the pension system and the demographic trends without mentioning at all migration. And then we look at whether individuals would connect the dots and change their perception about the role of migration, or taking into account of all of this. So this experiment, as I said, took place in September 2021. Mostly, we also had another survey in January 2022, but for a small group of people. There was this 10 minutes online questionnaire asking about clearly demographics, asking them about what they thought about immigration, and also to tell us about their views about the magnitude of the phenomenon and the composition between legal and illegal migrants, and then also about the functioning of the pension systems. After providing this information, the participants were split in two groups, and one of the two groups received this video explaining that the current pension are funded by the current workers, so we pay as you go, and that the ratio of the current pensioner to current workers is increasing. And in particular, it was stated, this data that I was mentioning to you before. I wonder whether I can get on this. No, I think it's not possible to have this hyperlink working, but I wish to show to you the treatment in Spain. But anyhow, the point was simply made there, but it was simply stating these two facts and providing some information. Don't worry. I can click, but perhaps, given that I'm here. So in España el sistema de pensiones de reparto, and then there were a few, the pensiones de hoy, so that was the type of treatment that was provided in Spain, okay? Okay, so then both groups had to respond to a second set of questions, and they were indeed about the functioning of a pension system and the demographic trends. So basically was trying to see whether they had understood the content of the information being provided to them. And then the second type of question were indeed look at whether individuals were connecting dots, so putting together these two additional pieces of information that we were providing and change their opinion, their attitude towards migrants. So this is the situation before they saw the video. As you can see, there is quite widespread misunderstanding of how the pension system operates. So there is a significant group, about 10%, who think that they fund tomorrow pensions, and a larger group, about 1/3 of the interviewees, thinking that contribution fund both today and tomorrow pensions, and then quite a lot also not answering, so saying that they don't know about it. There is more awareness about the fact that the number of pension is going to grow faster than the number of contributors, but clearly not the perception of the extent to this would happen. So the first thing clearly we look at is whether the information treatment did affect their knowledge of the work of the pension system, as well as their knowledge of the demographic trends, so basically the direct effect of the information treatment. And this seems to be the case. Indeed, after the video, the participants, so the treatment group, in the treatment group was 6 percentage points more likelihood of answering correctly to the question about the work of the pay-as-you-go pension systems. And also about the second question on demographics, there was also an increase in the correct answers. And if you put together the two questions, the increase was about 10 percentage points after watching the video. So the video seemed to have been rather effective in providing this information, and the answer of the interviewees improved in this respect. The provision of this information also, although, as I said before, migration was never mentioned in the treatment, did this also change their attitudes toward migrants? The answer is yes. There was an increase in the willingness to accept migrants of about 2.6 percentage points relative to the average response in the no video groups. It was a broad view rather than specifically on pensions when we ask about pension or the economy or the culture of the country, but in general the perception about the migrants improved as a result of this experiment. Clearly, we were also interested in seeing, given that sometimes views about migrants are politically induced, are very much related to political views of individuals, carry out some heterogeneity analysis by political views, affiliation of the individuals. This is also based on some literature that suggests that this is the case. Generally, Republicans are more likely to blame government for inflation. Higher immigration leads to lower support for redistribution, particularly for far-right individuals. Also, there are also previous studies suggesting that information provision is effective only for those who are not too much ideologically biased. So we decided to divide the responses in three groups. On the one hand, voters of populist parties, so in Spain, Vox, in Italy, Lega, Fratelli d'Italia, and the five-star movements, and then the voters of all other parties, and then the undecided voters. What we found is that the effect on the direct effect of a treatment in terms of the knowledge of the work of a pension system and of a demographic crisis was actually stronger among the voters of populist parties and among the undecided voters, but the effect on their perception of the migrants, so the connection of the dots, let me use this expression, was stronger among the voters of a non-populist on the non-populist countries. Actually, among the voters of the populist, there was even some stronger opposition of migrants, signaling a potential backlash. So what could explain the behavior of populist and undecided voters? There are three possible channels that explain this. The first one is ideology, so the fact that ideology clearly reduces your degree of acceptance, and there are simply something that prevents you from putting together the various pieces of evidence. Another possible explanation is that there may be a selection in terms of cognitive skills across the three groups, and that may have made it more difficult for unsophisticated people to connect the dots. And the third one is that there can be also a general distrust towards the information that was provided and generally about the institutions. So for the ideology, one way we could control for this is to split the populist group into two different categories. One are the far-right populists, like Lega Fratelli d'Italia and Vox on the one hand, and on the other hand, the populists who tend to have an that refuse to locate along the left and right spectrum as the five-star movement. And as you can see, when they were asked to locate them along the spectrum, the electors of the five-star movement were very much located to the center of the spectrum, while the other populist of the far right. So the idea was to compare what had been happening for the voters of the five-star with respect to the voters of the other far-right movements. And we actually found that the voters of the five-star movement were very much aligned to the other populist voters. So basically no difference in this respect. This seems to suggest that the pure ideological factor is not so important. The second possible, clearly, mechanism could be difficulties in processing the information. But at least the first stage of the information, the direct information about the work of the pension system and the demographic trends was actually leading to revisions of our views, as I said also before, with a stronger effect among the undecided voters and the voters of the populist party. So I think that also this type of channel doesn't seem to play an important role. So we are left with the third possible channel, which is related to distrust and commitment. The fact that given that the populists base their narrative on simple policy commitments, and populist voters may be displaying low trust in general, and so that may in a way refuse to put together the two pieces of evidence that were provided to them, and in a way, I'm almost done. Given also their distrust in elites, they may refuse to bring together these two pieces of evidence in viewing about, in changing their view about the role of migration. They have been subscribing to parties that have been really making of anti-migration sentiments and their key message, and they refuse to abandon that type of narrative in general. So to conclude, we have this, migration can be an important factor in dealing especially with the fertility crisis. Labor market can accommodate such changes without significant disruptions, even in the short run, as the studies of these reforms have been suggesting, and in particular as to the substitutability between young and older workers, and clearly could go hand in hand with the effort of countries to increase the retirement age. There doesn't seem to be a trade-off between increasing retirement age and allowing for migrants to come in terms of the size of the contribution base. But at the same time, we have this strong opposition to immigration, in addition to the opposition that we have to retirement age, to the increasing the retirement age. That has been a lot investigated, but much less has been done in looking at the opposition to immigration and its relation with views about the pension system. So this experiment that we carried out in Italy and Spain shows that providing people with information, neutral information on pension system and demographic trends, raise their knowledge of the topics, but also have some indirectly improvement in their views about migrants. But this effect are confined to voters of non-populist party. You don't see the same type of effect among the populist voters. We have been carrying out more heterogeneity analysis, looking at whether in the interviewees dependent children, the effect seems to be stronger for interviewees with dependent children, but again, only limited to those who declare not to have been voting for populist parties in the previous election. And the most convincing, in light of clearly of this rather suggestive evidence that we were able to bring together, explanation for this fact that populist voters do not connect the dots is related to the lower trust that they have in representation in general, in representative democracies and in institutions. So I think that there is a message that may be useful for a communication campaign. If you want to really make people understanding that there is this role of migrants into paying and making sustainable pension system, it is better not to talk at all about the migrants, but provide the raw information about these two developments. I'm saying also from my personal experience, because when I was working at the Italian Social Security, we were providing this information, and we were indeed facing a similar type of reaction by. So if you talk about migration, immediately message becomes immediately very much politicized. If you instead provide neutral information about how the pension system operates, and on that there is clearly very low awareness, there is a lot of misunderstanding about how pay-as-you-go pension system operate, and you provide information about the actual trend in fertility and in old age dependency ratios. This information may actually have an impact also on the views about legal migration, and by doing that clearly could improve both management of migration and the way it could be possibly used to improve the sustainability of the pension systems. And I stop here. I leave on the questionnaire in Spain, so in Spanish. So.
Okay. Questions? Here they. I don't think so, no. What? This? Yes, you won't be able to hear. Just wait a second. Or maybe you can say the question and I'll repeat it as long as the question.
Okay, good. So the first thing was like your motivation when you said like one way immigrants are beneficial is because they pay the pension system but not long enough to collect it then later. But I mean, is the idea then that they just that they don't get any money, and that also sounds like it does sound a bit exploitative in a sense, right? And it's not a solution if they don't get a pension. And the other thing is like I think throughout the talk it seemed as if you consider any concerns about migration as kind of like playing it wrong and like biased and propaganda or something like that. But at the same time, there could be concerns. You showed this correlation plot of like employment, right? Which is not very causal and so on. And I'm sure there are certainly some concerns and some issues about migration, right? Like nothing is without any concerns. And I just wonder for information campaigning, maybe being open to potential concerns of people that people have, and not just saying, oh, you're just wrong and you can't connect the dots anyways and so on. I mean, that could also maybe also help, right? To be a little bit more open to those viewpoints.
I react immediately, or
no? Yeah, that question's too long for me to repeat.
No. The social free riding, I would just it was an example. Clearly, we should not draw on this, but clearly, migration, as long as it doesn't impact on fertility rates has only a temporary impact on relief of pension system, because clearly the migrants themselves will become then pensioners at some stage. What I was saying is that, however, this is what we observe in the data. There is quite large, and there is no normative statement there, it's just a positive statement. There is quite significant social free riding on migrants. They do not acquire enough seniority to get pensions. They pay contribution just for a few years, or they simply leave the country and there are no bilateral agreements allowing them to receive a pension. There are a number of factors, but we have been calculating this effect, and they are pretty sizable. In that. So, also this fact that migrants then will get the pension is not so much into play. Certainly there may be a number of considerations related to migration, by relation with the labor market prospect. Clearly, I agree with you, the cross-country evidence is a simple and a pure correlation. There have been a lot of studies done on the impact of migration on the labor market. What I was particularly focusing on, and that is causal evidence, is the effect of changing the composition by age of the workforce and having locked in a firm older workers and what that could have meant for the young workers. So clearly we have not been investigating the other type of mechanism, but that seems to suggest that there are quite strong complementarities between young and older workers. So having larger cohorts of young people entering the labor market every year, and there is evidence indeed that employers are really finding it hard to fill vacancies with young people nowadays. That is not becoming at cost of reducing employment prospect of older workers, just while you are increasing the retirement age. That could have been clearly a key concern. That's why I brought into a presentation which was more of an informational experiment, also this evidence that comes out of the Fornero reform, of the study of the Fornero reform in Italy. So I hope to have answered, but...
Okay. Raphael?
In your presentation, you referred to foreign workers as if they were a homogeneous group, but of course they are very heterogeneous in terms of age, country of origin, religion, and skills. So in connection with this challenge for the pay-as-you-go public pension systems, how do you see the role of skill bias immigration policies?
That's a very good question. Clearly, no doubt there are huge differences in terms of the labor market integration of migrants depending on their skill level, and also clearly the contribution insofar as they are proportional to wages they get. We all know that there is a very strong relationship between skills and wage levels. So clearly a skill-biased migration policy could strengthen even more the benefit from receiving relatively large flows of migrants. One has to question a bit the effectiveness of selective migration policy. There have been a lot of discussion about their impact both on the receiving country and on the sending countries. But policies that define pretty well the rules, such as point-based systems, seems to be rather effective in selecting the migration population in the way you plan to do. While instead, if you have very tight migration policies, putting very low quotas, that instead tend to create a self-selection of relatively low skill types, because they come in any event and they accept to work illegally, and that's clearly not an option for many skilled workers. Also, selective migration policies at the same time need to go hand in hand with policies that allow for the mutual recognition of titles. Otherwise, there is a lot of downgrading, skill downgrading of the newcomers. They are forced to take up jobs that clearly are not corresponding to their level of qualification, and that clearly reduce also their potential contribution to the pension system. But it's a very good point, I agree, and clearly, given the data we had, we could not look too much into that.
Sorry. We talked a lot about immigration, but what about emigration, and especially in Italy? Like, what is the role of it for the pension funds and also for fertility in a sense? Like, all these women that leave are reducing the cohort every year. And yeah, that was the question.
No, that's another well taken point. Yeah, we have also substantial out-migration of relatively high-skilled young people in Italy nowadays, and that is clearly another key concern. But I think it's very much a matter of labor market policies, of easing the entry in the labor market of young people, of wage setting. There are a number of things that are important, the transition from school to work. All of these things are clearly important. In terms of the relationship with migration, there have been studies looking at whether there was any type of relationship between the size of immigration flows and emigration flows, but there doesn't seem to be a strong relationship between the two phenomena. But I agree with you, that's another very important issue, as well as labor force participation of women. Clearly, the way to deal with this increased dependency ratio is also to act on the participation margin of women in particular. And on that, migration can be rather important because given the structure of personal services in Italy, the fact that we have largely informal child care and also care for dependent people, migrants are clearly playing a very important role in this sector. So reducing migration flows is something that tend to involve also reduced participation of women in the labor market.
So in Italy, if I remember well, there was this gradual transition to a national account system. I wonder if you could see some differences in attitudes toward immigration depending on whether you were in the old system versus the new system, and so on, whether participation in each of the systems are also distinguishing by workers.
That's a very good point. We see that there is a stronger effect among older workers, which may also be perhaps related to the fact that older workers seem to be way more interested in the future of the pension than the young workers. I'm not sure but whether this is clearly, the age divide is important also to disentangle the group of people still under the DB system and those under the DC system. But the problem of fertility and of the cohorts at entry is common to both type of regimes. And actually, this is perhaps something we should talk at some stage. The NDC system clearly is something that in principle should induce people to pay contribution and make them more aware of this, and was done in Italy also to reduce the size of informal sector. But on the other hand, in terms of the message that you give to individuals, may be misleading because when I was working at the Italian Social Security, I was getting every single day letters of people saying, but we are paying in this bank account, because it mimics like a funded scheme. People tend to think that it is indeed a funded scheme. So they were protesting if I don't know, for any type of decision that was made in terms of the pension system. But it was something that induced even a stronger view of the pension system, of the public system as operating not as a pay-as-you-go, but as a bank account. So, you know, there are pros and cons of the NDC in this respect that one should be aware of. There was also another one here.
Oh, okay. I'll go ahead quickly.
Very, very quickly. I was thinking on Rafa's question on skill bias migration policies, and you said, if I understood correctly, that was a good policy from the point of view of the Ministry of Social Security. But I was thinking on other ministries, Ministry of Labor, for instance, that maybe wants to have, you know, immigrants for construction, for, you know, agriculture, no? And maybe preferred an skill bias migration policy. How should I weight these two goals?
Well, the PBS can do both, can achieve both, you know, can give points also based not only on skill, but also on the fact that there are shortages of some type of occupation. And I think in that also the social security agent would, not only the labor minister, but also the social security administrator is supposing to have two ministries as in Spain nowadays. I think both would be interested, because that means that they would work immediately and pay contribution, because they fill vacancies and they won't be unemployed, say. So in that respect, it's useful also to have both dimensions.
Yes, I would like to come back to the Rafael question before about the skill bias of immigration and linking it with productivity issues, okay? So if a country is not able to capture skill, skilled workers in terms of immigrants, then it can affect negatively productivity. And this is an issue not just for the sustainability of a social security system, but just for even for the global debt. And just another question. You choose two countries, Spain and Italy, which are quite, in relative terms with other countries in Europe, they are quite recently immigrant receiving countries, okay, in which the second generation of immigrants are not still very generalized there, okay? I wonder, and this is a speculative question, if your result will still remain in the case of asking them to people in Germany or France, in which they are far ahead in the issue of immigrants and so on.
Well, the first one is a remark, and I could not agree more with you. Clearly, you know, it's the way out of many things is having stronger productivity increase, and clearly skill migration can be important in this respect. Clearly, depending on how the human capital of migrants compare to the native population, you can have beneficial effect on growth or not. On the second issue, I think that indeed, no, there is. So you were. Let me remember. You said that the second part was on. Was more on the. Oh yes, with second generation, yeah. Clearly, no, yeah. Sorry, because yes, no. The second generation is clearly we have limited observation there. We know that the second generation in other countries got adapted also to fertility rate of the general population in general. It's also easier to integrate. Yeah, we haven't done the same experiment in country with a longer tradition of immigration like France and Germany. But yeah, that perhaps could be an interesting experiment to be carried out. But the hostility vis-à-vis migrants seems to me to be also present in these countries. You know, it's a general climate that have changed in that respect. Thank you.
Thanks very much.